Hello and welcome to Conversations. In this program, we talk to scholars and researchers about their research. So today we have with us Professor Purushottam Agarwal, who is a well-known scholar and he has engaged with Kabir for more than 50 years now. So we will talk to him about his engagement, about the relevance of Bhagat Kabir, his text, and so on. Welcome, Professor Purushottam Agarwal.
Thank you very much.
What kept you occupied with Kabir?
In fact, as I have written in the preface to my latest book on Kabir, that is Kabir, the poet philosopher of early modern India, I was, looking back now, I was a rather unusual child. I had peculiar questions, peculiar queries, and a very different kind of temperament. Very lonely kind of temperament, very quiet, and but at the same time dangerous enough if I get angry for something. And I had all kind of questions, and my parents used to feel that this is some kind of sanskar of previous life or something. So these kind of existential questions, as we would call them, and as later on, much later on, I read and realized this opening sentence of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, the only valid problem of philosophy is that of suicide. Why the hell should I live at all? Why I should commit suicide? What is the purpose of my life? So these questions used to bother me since early childhood. And naturally, as it was believed then and it is believed even today, that the primary answers, the primary sources for the answers to these kind of questions are the religious or so-called spiritual texts. So in that process, I started reading, attending many things. I went to various kind of religious places, temples, dargahs, gurdwaras, Ramakrishna Mission, and so on and so forth. So at that level, the engagement with Kabir started right since then in early childhood. Later on, I developed a slightly more systematic interest. And when I reached JNU to do my MA and later on PhD, by then it was very clear in my mind that I would be doing research on Kabir. I wrote a paper for my MA course on Kabir, which was very well received. Professors appreciated it. In fact, a friend got it translated and published in English. And then, since 1979, I did my MA in 79. Since 79, I started working on Kabir for my PhD degree. And then...
So you found purpose in Kabir?
Well, not exactly purpose only in Kabir, but the way to ask the relevant and right questions. Okay. For example, since you raised this question, you see, Dr. Saab, in most of such people, in the lives of most of such people, you find a moment of enlightenment. Buddha, Nanak Dev, or whosoever, you find a moment of enlightenment. In Kabir's life, very interestingly, there is no particular moment of enlightenment. There is no incident in Kabir's life which can be understood or which has been explained as the moment of enlightenment. The conclusion I draw from this is this, that for us, the whole process of life is a process of enlightenment. Every moment is a moment of learning. There is not enlightenment in the sense that you became enlightened and then you can just take it easy. Even in the lives of people who had this moment of enlightenment, both the Christ or whosoever, there are ups and downs after that. So this is one thing which I realized while studying Kabir. The other thing which is more important, I realized that if I want to understand the dynamics of my society in present and past, and that dynamics is relevant for 20th century world, 21st century world, not only for India only, then I have to go back to vernacular wisdom.
Okay.
And Kabir is a very eminent voice in that vernacular wisdom.
Okay. So you have very well explained that these were the questions you were confronting and you started engagement with Kabir.
Yeah.
So over a period of say 500 years, what kept Kabir relevant? Is it the vernacular wisdom or something else?
Well, what kept Kabir relevant is this. Kabir, okay, let me put it this way. Kabir is neither the first nor the last in a certain kind of tradition. There were people before him, there were people after him. But he is certainly unique. Unique in the sense that he articulates the concerns of this particular tradition. This tradition of rational engagement without dismissing spirituality. After 19th century, for various historical reasons, rationalism has been seen and understood as a kind of counterpoint to spirituality. Kabir and other such bhakts, for example Nanak Dev or others, they do not see the question of rationalism and spirituality as opposing each other. So this is one thing. The other is Kabir's repeated emphasis on the interaction, on the dialogue between inside and outside. I mean, there is a very famous and moving poem by Kabir. भीतर कहो तो जग में लाजे, बाहर कहो तो झूठा लूं, मैं कई विधि कथों गंभीरा लूं. How do I describe the profound truth? If I say that this resides within me, then what's happening outside? Is it all just illusion or what? And if I say it is outside me, then I am obviously speaking untruth because I know that this is inside me. So, kehi vidhi kathon gambhira lu. The resolution of the dilemma comes in the poem in the next line. Bahar bhitar sabad nirantar. So, the profound truth lies in the awareness of constant interaction between inside and outside. You cannot claim to be spiritual while at the same time being totally indifferent or unconcerned with the suffering all around.
You have explained that he is neither the first one nor the last one. So he is part of a tradition, but still he is unique. With this, the question of authorships comes into the center. Do you think Kabir as a tradition or Kabir as a person who is writing certain things?
Both. In fact, the question of authorship or authenticity of Kabir's works is very hard not to crack. In fact, the early British scholars, when they were engaging with Indian history and culture, so one of them, very prominent one, H.H. Wilson, writing in 1828, his book, A Sketch of Religious Sects of Hindus, he actually wrote that in all probability Kabir is a takhallus. And he used the word takhallus in
So
English.
it means very many people are using the same takhallus.
Yeah, so he says that it seems to be there was no one called Kabir. It's only a takhallus that many people have been using. But this is obviously false. Because we know that there was someone called Kabir. The references in literary and historical sources, in pure Mughal chronicles like Abul Fajl, the reference in works like Dabistan-e-Mazahib, in Dara Suko. So this is not true that there was no Kabir. There was certainly a person called Kabir who was living in Banaras, who was Bibar by birth, and who was revered across the religious divide, and who was known for his sharp criticism and as well as for his deeply moving emotional poetry. This is a fact. Now, as it happens, we do not find any manuscript surviving from Kabir's own time. I mean, by scholarly consensus, Kabir is supposed to have passed away in 1518, Common Era. And we do not have any manuscript which can be claimed as old as that. The Kabir Granthavali, which was edited by Swayam Sundar Das and published in 1928, he claimed that one of the manuscripts consulted by him belonged to 1504. So then it becomes extremely authentic because it is during the lifetime of Kabir. But it has been doubted. Later scholars have doubted this kind of assignment. Personally, I tend to agree with Swayam Sundar Das for various reasons which I have explained in my latest book, Kabir Granthavali, a revised edition. But even those who do not agree with this early date, they also tend to agree that this is certainly early 17th century, this particular manuscript. Also, as I have pointed out, and I am happy to say that I am the first scholar to point out, that Dara Sweko in his Hasnatul Arfin quotes Kabir, and the Sakis cited by him are found in this manuscript. So this is certainly before Dara Sweko and so on. But we cannot say that we have any manuscript belonging to Kabir's own times. So this has been a very long debated question among scholars. Kabir Panthis prefer Kabir Bijak. Sikh tradition prefers obviously Adi Granth, that portion of Adi Granth. And in a scholarly world, of course, Adi Granth is considered important because of its ancientness, and its Granthavali is considered important. Again, because Granthavali projects Kabir as a holistic person. There you find mood swings, which is natural in a poet or in a human being. In that place you find Kabir sometimes quite joyful, quite outgoing, sometimes quite pensive, sometimes bursting with anger, sometimes talking in a very polite and humble way, and so on and so forth. Still, this is a fact that the oldest we can go about the manuscript, a scholarly consensus, is early 17th century. So now the question is that how do we determine? On this, I have my own way of looking at it. See, if you look at the popular world of this country, the traditions of people, I mean, take a simple test. You go to a most illiterate person and recite a doha, which glorifies Brahmins and Mullahs, which glorifies a certain kind of reading of Ved and Quran, and you tell them this is Kabir. He will flatly refuse to believe it, even if he is purely Angutati.
It means that's part of the folk wisdom?
The part of folk wisdom is this, that Kabir did not bother about the authority or sanctity of any religious scripture. Kabir Khan e Rakhi nahi Varnashram ki, as Nabadas puts it in way back in 17th century. So Kabir is seen as a poet of love, as a poet of interrogation. So many sayings attributed to him can be judged on this basis. But the fact remains that Granthavali is considered important, and so is Adi Granth, because of their belonging to earlier period than Bijak. We cannot say that this exactly is Kabir's work and this is not. The oldest manuscript apart from Granthavali is again Goindwal Pothij, which provide a basis for later compilation of Adi Granth, and a book found in Fatehgarh in Rajasthan, both belong to the same period, that is late 16th century. So this is the oldest we can go.
So the question of authenticity, authorship, these are important questions for any scholars.
Yes, of course.
But if we engage with Kabir, then there are other things like spiritual practices associated with Kabir.
I'll tell you something. The question of authorship in Indian tradition, it's not only about Kabir. For example, take the most important and the most revered text of Indian tradition, Mahabharata. Now this is believed consensually amongst scholars that the present text have evolved over a period of 600 years. From 3rd century before Common Era till 3rd century after Common Era. According to some scholars, even 6th century. And even then, Professor Sukthankar, the editor of the most authentic Mahabharata edition, that is Pune, Bhandarkar edition, he says that there were editions till 11th century. So in Indian tradition, we have to accept the fact that authorship is a flowing concept. It's not a frozen concept. So in order to determine the authenticity of a text, the pre-modern Indian tradition does not allow you the luxury or the convenience of coming to a very easy conclusion.
Are you suggesting that the authorship, in the sense that you have some kind of evidence or some kind of manuscript, is not that important as long as the spirit is same?
It is important, and that is why it is challenging. For example, I do not consider the attempts of Professor Sukthankar and his team, which took more than, believe it, more than 50 years in determining the authentic, quote unquote, authentic text of Mahabharata. And they had to concede this. As they say, and I agree, I would say the same thing about Kabir, authenticity is important, but the vulgate Kabir, the popular Kabir, has also to be taken into account.
So that Kabir is equally important.
If not equally important, then certainly to some extent important.
So it means Kabir is a very fluid
it's very fluid.
Person, or Kabir is a very fluid tradition.
Tradition,
Do
but
the potency of the tradition comes from fluidity?
I think the potency of tradition comes from the characteristics of the individual. As I told you, that a certain kind of poetry will not be considered by Kabir, even by a most uneducated person. On the other hand, some of the most famous poems of Kabir are not found in Granthavali. For example, one of his most famous, Jhini Jhini Bini Chadariya. It is not found in any written source. It is not found in Adi Granth. It is not found in Granthavali. Now, but it's a very important poem, and we cannot just ignore it or dismiss it because it is purely an oral tradition. So, orality has to be given due importance, but at the same time, orality has to be seen and analyzed with very strict tools of examination. Because there are poems which cannot obviously be of Kabir. There is clear case of anachronism also. So, for example, if you find in a poem going in the name of Kabir, for example, if you find Akbar being mentioned, then obviously it is not Kabir. So, apart from such obvious tests, we also go by the language. When we, the manuscript scholars, when we indulge in almost in a kind of hair-splitting job of determining the authenticity of a text, it's a very difficult thing, and there cannot be any final word.
So if we go in a chronological order from orality to text, that's one issue. But when we combine it with issues of like spiritual practices and performance practices, do the oral tradition continues even thereafter? So just explain it a bit.
The oral tradition continues till date. I mean, certainly after the arrival of print and circulation of these kind of printed works, the scope of innovation or additions in oral tradition has considerably reduced, but it still goes on. Oral tradition continues in the sense that people perform, sing, and many of them sing on the basis of their own family records or family traditions, or on the basis of popular understanding. For example, again, Rehna Nahi Desh Birana Hai. Many singers have performed it. Not found in any Kabir Granthavali. Jhini Jhini, I already told you. Any singer worth the name has performed this song. Whether it is Kumar Gandharv, or it is Tipaniya, or it is Mukhtiar Ali, or whosoever. But the poem is not to be found in any Kabir collection. So oral tradition is important, and it continues, but now it continues with some restrictions and some discipline. At the same time, as it happens, we all know, in India, this whole tradition of Katha, every Katha Vachak or every performer creates a new version of Katha. आप चाहे कबीर की कथा कह रहे हो, or you are talking of Bhagavad or anything. So one particular person is speaking about the same episode, will add something, will subtract something. This goes on. But certainly now the oral performance has to be, by definition, sensitive to the written word, available or generally accepted as by Kabir. They do not have that kind of liberty which they had, let us say, 200 years ago.
200 years ago. Yeah, perfectly fine. So one of the important question is, as early in the conversation you said that Kabir is not the last and he was not the first. And when we talk about Kabir in 2023, is it possible that he will still remain relevant for the people coming in the coming generations?
Yes, he will.
So what will keep him relevant for them?
For the simple reason that coming generation is realizing and will realize very deeply and sometimes with a lot of agony that the question of spirituality can on one hand not be ignored. On the other hand, it cannot be left in the hands of all kind of gurus who are indulging in commerce of spirituality. And it can certainly be not left into the hands of organized religion, which throughout the world is creating a veritable hell in the name of creating heaven. So a person like Kabir, who is quite deeply critical of organized religion and at the same time insists on a practice of spirituality with vivek, that it with some universal human wisdom, will remain relevant.
So Vivek is central to understand
Yes,
Kabir?
yes.
Just explain it.
Vivek, you see, there is a difference and we must make a differentiation between Gyan and Vivek, knowledge and Vivek. Kabir was supposedly illiterate. I do not agree with that, but that is general view. He certainly did not read many of the great texts, that is true. Or maybe if he read, he did not bother about them. So he is supposed to be illiterate on one hand, but his followers and admirers always address him as Sahib or Gyani ji. A typical Kabir Panthi will never mention Kabir by name. He will, if you were talking to a Kabir Panthi here, he would be using the word Sahib or Gyani ji. You would be using the word Kabir. He won't use it. So the fact that he is seen as Gyani ji indicates the fact that the tradition itself realizes that there are certain kind of knowledge which has to be distinguished from the so-called scholarly knowledge. Vivek in any case is wisdom, which of course works on the basis of knowledge, but also works on the basis of certain universal human values and certain empirical realities, rationalism. So in that sense, Vivek is important. And in this Vivek, I would judge even Kabir with Vivek. I won't agree with everything Kabir has said. I would judge myself. And in this I will be following Kabir himself. Sadhu aisa chahiye, jaisa soop subhaye. Sar sar ko gahe rahe, thotha de udaye. So even while working with Kabir, I will ignore thotha. I will only take up the sar. So there are many things in Kabir which I find irrelevant.
So Vivek will remain central to make Kabir relevant despite all the fluidity associated with Vivek.
Yes, yeah. Vivek is most important.
Yeah.
Not only in case of Kabir, but in case of any individual or any phenomenon.
Yeah. Professor Purushottam Agarwal, thank you very much for coming to our studio and explaining the whole ideas of authorship, authenticity, fluidity, and the importance of frozen and fluid text. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.